Welcome to my kitchen. Well, thanks to the Brady Bunch, we have this classic dinner. Pork chops and applesauce. Yes, I'm showing my age, but that's okay. I'm proud I've made it this far, and I'm just getting better. Seriously, this recipe is an amazing meal, and it's a classic that deserves some love. With a few updates to bring it into the future, this dish is delicious and can be used in so many ways. Of course, like a lot of my dishes, we start with onions. I'm using a large sweet onion. I prefer them to the yellow onions because the sweet onions have a more mild flavor. I also used a small amount of olive oil in the pan. I'm trying to keep track of calories, so I only used a little, so there's not so much extra fat. I'm also using a non-stick skillet, which makes it much easier to use less oil. I think that's why I like onions so much. They add so much flavor without adding a lot of calories. Once the onions are sliced and separated, you can salt and pepper them and add some other spices. I'm using thyme and sage. These spices also work great with the pork chops. I like to start the pan on high first. I like to get a little bit of color on the onions. I think it brings out the sweetness a little bit more. You can go ahead and turn the pan down a little bit once they start cooking. I also decided to add just a little bit of heat. I added about a teaspoon of red pepper flakes and gave it a good toss after that. Get everything mixed up. If you wanted to use thicker pork chops, you could, but I would finish them off in the oven. I would just put everything into a baking pan and finish cooking them in the oven so they can cook a little bit more evenly. Once the onions are done, you take them out of the pan. You want to salt and pepper your chops before you put them in the pan, both sides. And once again, I'm just adding a very small amount of olive oil and just enough to get them started. You want the pan on a high heat. We want a nice brown sear on both sides. We're just going to put 2 chops in at a time. You don't want to crowd the pan because you want these to get that nice brown sear to them. And if the pan is too crowded, they'll just steam and you won't get any color to them. Also use a splatter screen to help with the mess. And while the chops are browning, we can get on to the next 2 chops and get them ready. Salt and pepper both sides. Sometimes it's nice to not over-season things and let the true flavor come out. Salt and pepper is really all you need to bring out the flavor of the pork and not add any extra flavors. In some cases, simple is best. Once both sides are a nice color, then we can move on to the next 2 chops. Brown both sides, just like the others. We're going to add the Worcestershire sauce and the wine next. Be careful adding the wine. There is alcohol in it, and it can start a fire if you're not careful, especially if you have an open flame burner. And yes, this did set off my sensitive smoke alarm. Place the pan back on the burner on low. Add the onions back, and this time they can overlap. It won't make any difference. This is where the chops are going to finish cooking. You do want to cover them so everything gets cooked evenly, and they need about 10 minutes more. I checked them about halfway through, rearranged them a little bit to make sure that they are cooking evenly, and to give the onions a little stir to make sure they weren't sticking. You can see that the sauce has really developed a nice richness, and the chops are nice and tender. When it's done cooking, I put everything in a glass container. I find the glass containers are the best way to store food. They're easier to see what's in the container, and they're much easier to clean. The chops turned out so good. They were tender and had such a great flavor. They truly made a perfect retro dinner with updated flavors. This whole plate of food was more than enough and only had 600 calories with 40 grams of protein. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoy this recipe and I hope you give it a try. Let me know if you have any questions.